Hello, hello, and welcome to the Wonder in the Weeds show, where every week we explore and sometimes share how we live, love, and grow right alongside all of the grief and change and messiness that is this human life. I'm your host, Cristie Ritz-King, and I'm excited today to be here with you. I am coming to this recording kind of late because, I had a grand plan this year when I started this podcast. Actually, I think it's kind of ironic. Let's back it up a little bit. I started very first recording a podcast in January of 2020. I was at a Miami hotel room for Super Bowl, whatever. I don't remember what number it was. My husband had to work at the Super Bowl, and so I tagged along for a little bit of warmth in January and brought my microphone with me and my laptop and decided this is when I'm going to start my podcast. And I started it back then. It was called Conversations with Cristie, and it was really just like a musings kind of thing on the state of the world. And I don't know if you guys remember, but fast forward 2 months and we were in lockdown for global pandemic. And so it took a bit of a turn, and I started really focusing on trauma and how to parent through a crisis and things like that. All sort of still in my wheelhouse, professionally speaking, but not necessarily the topic of the podcast. As you might imagine, as the years went on and I sort of found trauma and crisis as my focus, I got a little burnt out of doing that week in and week out. I had some amazing conversations with some incredible professionals and would love to get back to that actually, but kind of just took a little break and then had the grand idea after a big move and a lot of changes and an empty nest to come back to doing the show, calling it Wonder in the Weeds, and talking really about how to find, well, exactly what I talked about in my intro, how to find the joy and the wonder and the light in all of the sort of day-to-day, either monotony or, trauma of regular life. And I did not count on 2 months after starting this, the new city that I moved to being occupied by federal forces who are tracking and stalking and kidnapping my neighbors. And I'm using all those words purposely, and I'll probably get banned from YouTube for it. But part of the reason that I was late to record today is because I had this plan of what we were going to talk about in the topics. And, my daughter, the Gen Zer, is going to come on every once in a while, and we're going to talk about the generational divide on certain topics. And then all of this started happening. And the last couple podcasts we've done have been about politics and been about crisis and how do you parent and help yourself through crisis. And I just, again, felt like I needed to pivot, and also just was like a little bit confused about what do I talk about? It feels silly. Last week's episode was on transgender women in sports, and that actually made sense politically because there were 2 cases in front of the Supreme Court, but it also felt a little disjointed because I'm right outside my window are, ICE officers stalking my neighbors in the streets. And so it feels weird to talk about anything else. And also I don't want to only talk about that because I'm not a political expert. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a human rights expert. I'm not any of those things. I am a trauma and crisis expert, but that wasn't really the point of this podcast. So I certainly could talk to you about the trauma of what's going on and how it's going to affect everybody and the crisis of, what's currently happening in our country and really globally as a result of what's happening in our country. But I wasn't sure I really wanted to do that either because that was not supposed to be the point of this. The point of this was supposed to be, how do you find the wonder in the weeds of life? And it just felt like the weeds were super thick. So I hadn't recorded anything in a few days. I hadn't stayed on my regular schedule. My producer's probably not thrilled, but he also understands, I think. And even today I woke up and was like, well, what could the weeds be? What are the weeds right now? And it was like, well, are the weeds the ICE occupation? Are the weeds the fact that there was one change in leadership made? And so now everybody's sort of like, oh, I think things are fine in Minneapolis. P.S. They're not fine in Minneapolis. And very little has changed, as a matter of fact. Could it be trans rights because they're being trampled on in all over the place? Could it be the release of the Epstein files and how, once again, it seems like people are ignoring victims and don't really care about the bad behavior of billionaires? And or could it be that, personally speaking, we've had, some unexpected and quite expensive home repairs that we've had to do on our brand new home, or my kid's car that we had just done all this expensive work on that died. And so she needed to get a new one. There's just so much. There's so much. It's hard to know where to look. I said to my husband the other day, like, I feel like I'm just constantly doing this. If you're listening and not watching, I'm just spinning my head back and forth. Like my head is on a swivel, looking out for, or not even looking out for, but like not knowing where to look. Like, where do I focus my attention, my energy, my fear? Like, where do I look? It seems to be there's so many bad things happening at once. How do I know which one to focus on? But also, how do I not just get totally overwhelmed and buried under all of this stuff? So that is the reason why I haven't recorded in a while. But also what we're going to talk about today is two things. One, how do you figure out where to focus or where to focus your energy? And two, how do you not get buried under it? And so I don't know if you tuned in a couple of weeks ago when I talked about sort of living through a crisis, but part of the sort of self-preservation piece of living through a crisis is determining the difference between the acute crisis, the thing that's happening in the moment, and what you might need if it's going to be a long fight. So for instance, I keep talking about the ICE occupation. And again, I'm using that language purposely because it does feel like, thousands of armed and masked men have, I think they're almost all men. Maybe there's probably some women out there, but I haven't seen any yet, have, invaded the cities. And I say the cities because everybody in the news keeps talking about Minneapolis. But the truth is it's Minneapolis and St. Paul on a daily basis. It's a lot of St. Paul. And it's a lot of suburbs and towns outside of Minneapolis and St. Paul. So it is definitely not in one location. It's sort of everywhere. And I am out of the immediate danger of it because I live about, 15 miles outside of the city. But they're here too. And we have different programs and community groups and things like that are still involved. So it's affecting all of us. And I want to say one thing about it because I think that some of the news that people are getting. So let me back up. So right now, that's where a lot of my energy is going because it's in my face. And also it feels very much like this is a tipping point. And if we don't pay attention to the stuff that's happening right this moment, it's just going to continue to get worse and snowball and spread further. Sorry, can you hear my dog snoring? Hey, you might have that in the background. Apologies, but nobody wants to wake up. It's like waking a sleeping baby. Nobody wants to wake a sleeping dog. So a lot of my energy and focus is there right now. And yes, I still wake up in the morning and listen to the news podcasts and read the, the paper on my phone, the paper, quote unquote, on my phone and have a moment almost every day of like, woof, where do I look? But by necessity and also just, because that's where I'm choosing, my focus has largely been on my neighbors and community members in the Minneapolis, St. Paul area and what that means on a larger scale. So that's where I'm focusing. And I want to say one thing about that for those of you listening that aren't in this area, because I think that the news coverage I see a lot of sort of, I don't want to say mistakes, but a lot of perhaps like it's grayer on the news than it really is here. So I had mentioned earlier, nothing's really changed. There was a leadership change and, that seemed like a good thing. They were admitting that maybe, actually they weren't admitting anything, but they changed their leadership. But they really just swapped out one guy for another and nothing's really changed as far as the tactics on the ground. They keep saying that they're going to draw down and they're going to have people leave. But from what we're seeing on the streets, nothing's really changed. They're still driving around after people in their cars. They're still showing up at schools. They're still banging on the doors of people's houses. They still don't seem to have any proper paperwork to say what they're after or why they're after certain people. So, far be it for me to say they're racial profiling, but it sure looks like they're racial profiling. There are a lot of people that are sent out of the state almost before they have any contact with attorneys or any even like charges against them. They are often then released if they don't get sent out of the state. They're released from where they're held here into the cold with almost always have their phones taken away from them. If they came with any coats, they don't have any coats. They're released out into the cold. So what I want to say about this is, yes, are there protests? Yes, there are protests. There's a protest every single day outside of the federal building where people are detained. And there have been various protests I know there's a whole group of clergy that's going around into corporate headquarters to try to get corporations to pay attention. I know that have been what do they call them? Noise protests noise gatherings outside of the hotels where it's reported that ICE are staying. That is usually just like bands playing. Like there's a brass band that follows around. There's guys that bring drums and just stand outside the thing. It's quite creative and funny, I think. And of the protests, they have largely, not 100%, I don't think anything's ever 100%, but largely been peaceful. And the only sort of conflict and, people are calling ICE agents names, people are yelling and screaming, people are blowing whistles, people are holding signs, but they're not violent. They're not attacking. They're not doing any of the things they're being accused of doing. The protests are largely peaceful unless the masked men come into the crowd and start throwing gas canisters and pepper balls and things like that. So the peace is on the part of the protesters. Let's put it that way. But what I want to talk about is more than just the protests. What I have witnessed and only sort of tangentially been a part of, again, because I'm like adjacent to the cities. So I've been doing what I can, but I don't live in the neighborhoods, or my kids don't go to the schools that are being affected. So I'm not in the sort of inner circle part. But what I've witnessed is like a really well-run, this is going to sound really simple and I don't mean for it to, but if you've ever been like a PTA parent, you understand what I'm about to say. It's like the most well-run and effective meal train ever, in the sense that whatever is happening is exactly what needs to happen to meet the needs of the community. So there are shops that have opened themselves up to be donation centers for diapers and baby formula and food and coats and things like that, that will then be delivered by a whole host of other volunteers to places where families and people are afraid to leave their own homes. There are organizations that have like created full calendars of places to go and get coffee or get dinner or have lunch with friends and meetups in restaurants that are suffering because either their staff is afraid to come to work, or their staff has all been detained, or their regular customers are afraid to come in. And so their sales have dropped and they're really struggling. There are groups that are fully responsible for walking kids to and from school or driving kids to and from school because kids and families are afraid to go to school because people are waiting in masks with guns to detain people, either parents or students, that they deem detainable. So there's whole groups of people doing that. There are whole groups of people delivering meals to people. There are whole groups of people grocery shopping for people. There are people who, when they do their regular grocery shopping, are just adding an extra cart of stuff and delivering it to their neighbors because they're afraid to leave their houses. There are people who are volunteering at schools because the teachers of those schools are afraid to come in. There are churches that have set up warming centers for protesters and first aids for protesters because they are routinely getting shot in the face with gas, the gas canisters or pepper spray or pepper balls shot with, things that look like AK-47s or I don't know guns, but things that look like automatic rifles with pepper balls in them. So there is somebody for every job right now. And what is being called protests, quote unquote, is largely people alerting the community to ICE's presence in the community. So, for instance, they are not showing up with warrants that say, hey, this hardened criminal lives at this address, and so we're coming to get this hardened criminal. They're showing up with these papers that they write themselves, and then they're basically just knocking on doors. And so what they'll do is show up at apartment complexes and just kind of wait. They sit and wait for people to come out. And so what citizens are doing is that they're going with their whistles and their signs. And when word spreads that ICE is somewhere, either because someone witnessed them physically or was in a car behind them and, saw where they were going, the community will show up to try to basically just record. They're not interfering. They're not getting in the way of the detainment. They are yelling. They are asking, why these people aren't ashamed of what they're doing. They are showing up to alert the community that they are possibly in danger. And then they are there to pull their phones out and record what happens, because as we've seen time and time again, we're not getting the straight story from people who aren't there. So that's what's happening here. It is not just a protest. It is not just, it's not people interfering with government officials. It's not people getting in the way. It's not people storming into churches. Yes. Was there one protest inside a church? There was a protest inside a church during a church service because one of the pastors of that church was an ICE official in the town. And so people felt like the church needed to know that their pastor was not on the side of community. Do I agree with it? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether I agree with it or not. Do I think it was the best use? Doesn't matter what I think. I don't know that I would have done that, or do I think that was maybe the most effective use of time? But I certainly don't think anybody should have been arrested for it. And it certainly wasn't violent or aggressive. It was a protest inside a church, and it interrupted the church service for sure, but it wasn't aggressive or violent or any of the other things they're trying to say. And it was one of about 1,000 things happening, and it was the least important one. We've had the 2 days, the Minnesota walkout day and the national walkout day. And in both instances, tens of thousands of people flooded the streets of Minneapolis to march in protest of what's going on here peacefully, happily. We had one agitator come in about 2 weeks ago. He supposedly planned a pro-ICE, fascist, basically. I guess it was supposed to be a rally. I think it ended up being like 2 guys or maybe a handful of people who showed up, who got totally overwhelmed physically by the I don't even want to call them counter protesters, because they were just there protesting anti-ICE, but the regular Minnesotans who were there protesting physically overwhelmed this guy, ended up having him backed up into like a window ledge. And then a black man and a trans woman actually saved and rescued him and drove him out of there. I have heard, I don't give him any energy, but I have heard that his videos make it seem like he was driven out and beaten up and, hung out to dry. And neither of those things are true. We actually have video evidence of the contrary. He was definitely, I'm sure roughed up a little bit on his way out of town, because he was, it was him against about 100 people. But mostly what they were doing was like shoving him into the car that the person was trying to get him to. Anyway, he's coming back is the point. He's actually back. I saw a video of him last night get kicked out of a bar because he was like in there spouting Nazi propaganda. And the bartender was like, "We don't have to serve you. This is private property. We don't have to serve you." And so then he tried to be like, "This is what happens when you're pro-government. You get kicked out of establishments." Anyway, blah. I'm not using any of their names. I'm not talking about any of them because they don't deserve my energy or time. But I'm just telling you, like, these are the things that are happening on a daily basis, both good and bad. The bad things that are happening are being way downplayed by media and federal government and everybody else. And largely, I think, ignored right now because we're hoping we can move on, or because of all the things I said at the top of this podcast, which is also the Epstein files were released. And also there are trans rights being trampled all over, and also. It's just like, again, where do you look? So that's my little Twin City spiel. Just from somebody who is, Twin Cities adjacent. I want you to know what's really happening here, and to please ask you not to take your eyes off of it, because it has not gone away. It is not better. And they are still on a daily basis tormenting and terrorizing and traumatizing our community and my neighbors. Okay, that's that. So obviously that is where my energy is directed right now. I have to make a decision every single morning what to listen to, what to read, how much of stuff to read and listen to, because I kind of have like a rolling list of podcasts and publications that I give my energy to. It's really easy to just open your phone and get sucked into whatever social media app that you happen to open for the day. And boy, I mean, I could get pulled in for hours. And I'll be honest, at the beginning of the ICE occupation, I had moments where I was like, oh my gosh, I have been scrolling this for way too long and taking too much in that I couldn't do anything about. And it was just making me feel worse and worse and worse and worse and less powerful. And that isn't helpful to anybody. So I have to wake up every morning and decide, okay, I'm going to get X amount of time on the news. I'm going to read X amount of things about these different amount of stories. And then I have to decide where I'm going to focus for the day, what I'm going to do with my time and my energy and my resources for the day. And then I'm going to have to sort of release the rest of it. Like, I can't do it all. I can't look away. I know a lot of people are out there trying, especially white people, because we are not used to being this uncomfortable. So it's really easy. I've seen a lot of quote unquote wellness people on social media being like, it's okay. It's okay to not get involved. This isn't your fight. It's okay. And like, bullshit. It is your fight, and it's not okay to look away. It is okay to take care of yourself in the meantime, because this is that difference between crisis and long-term action. This is not an acute thing where we can only focus like 100% of our energy for a few days and then we can regroup. This is something that's going to take us a long time and a lot of effort. And so we need to temper it with other things. Hence the wonder in the weeds part of this entire prospect and show is, how do you live? You know, what do they say? The only thing constant in life is change. Recently, it has felt like the stuff that is changing and the stuff that is happening is so huge and monumental that it's hard to know if we even can do anything about it. But my argument too would be, there's always something you can do. Find the thing that you can do that you can manage with all of your other stuff. You know, yesterday or 2 days ago or whatever day it was that I had to help my daughter get a car, that was what I did that day. That was my mental capacity, was, you know, go out, help her. Really, I didn't do anything. I just sat there as like moral support because she took care of it like a champ. But I was, you know, I drove her there, and then I kind of every once in a while would be like, how about this? How about this? You know, kind of I have 30 more years of experience in life than you right now. And so when I was 24, this is what I wish somebody had said to me, 23. So that was what I focused on. I couldn't, you know, be out in the community. I couldn't be focused on the larger sort of global problem because I had to do the life thing. But what that did was give me a little bit of renewal to be able to go back and do the big work of global and political stuff. If you're not doing that every day, if you're not giving yourself time to rest, time to recover, time to fill back up, then you won't be able to sustain what we need you for. So I'm choosing every day where to focus my energy, how much of my energy to sort of put in each place. You know, I rattled off 10 things at the beginning of this that are happening in this exact same moment. And I have to choose which one of those or two of those I'm going to dwell in, if you will. And I have to match that also with like my abilities too. You know, I don't have all of the skills and all of the knowledge that's helpful with certain things. So I have to figure out, okay, where's that intersection between what I have to offer and what's needed at any given time. And that's then where I decide to focus and to put myself and my energy. It changes every day. So, you know, I have said repeatedly, like, I'm mostly focused on the Twin Cities area because that's where I am physically, but also immigration and multiculturalism has never not been a thing for me. Like, part of what I love about where I've always lived is the diverse nature of the places that I choose to live. I know some of you are probably laughing because I moved to Minnesota, but believe it or not, it's surprisingly diverse here. And so that's always been something that's important to me. Immigrant rights, this idea that anybody's illegal has never sat right with me. That's just like it's just gross. And so, and I also know enough to know that doesn't mean I don't want criminals and bad guys I don't want criminals and bad guys off the streets. I was going to say out of my country, but quite frankly, that's not the point. I know they said they were going to go after criminals and bad guys, but that's not who they're going after. And I don't necessarily think we need to get criminals and bad guys out of the country. I mean, half the criminals and bad guys belong here. Probably more than half of them are U.S. citizens. So like, that's a futile effort if you're going to try to do that. But me saying I am anti-ICE is not the same thing as me saying I want criminals and bad guys roaming the streets, which is what I've been accused of a bunch recently. There's nuance in this argument, and there's humanity in this argument. And when you get into those sort of black and whites of, oh, well, if you're anti-ICE, and that means you want criminals and rapists and everything else running the streets. What? Like, how does that make sense to you? No, I don't want those people. In fact, that's why the other thing that I'm focused on is the Epstein files and trans rights, because I actually stand up for women and don't want women to be the victims of bad guys and sex offenders. And I don't want anybody to be in danger when they walk around in their day-to-day life. So to say one thing equals another thing is just unfair and, quite frankly, not true. So back to where I put my energy, the things that I feel passionate about and always have are, you know, the diversity of the world in which I live and also the rights of women and children. It's just, I mean, I sort of feel like everybody should care about those things, but just professionally speaking, that's sort of where I've lived a lot of the time is the intersection of those three things. So it makes sense then that one of the things I'm focused on is the immigration angle of all this. And the other thing that I'm focused on is the sexual assault of women, abuse of women, mistreatment of women, and women's rights, whether they are trans women or cis women. So that's sort of where my radar goes when I listen to all these podcasts and read all of these things. Those are the things that pop up for me. And I'm still a pop culture girl. So I'm still going to look at like design elements on Instagram, and I'm still going to have golden retriever videos on Instagram, and I'm still going to be into the Grammys, and I'm still going to look for, we kind of took Sunday night off for the Grammys because it was like, what if we just have some like lovely information in our brains instead of all the other stuff we've been consuming recently. I will relish in the halftime performance of the Super Bowl. We've watched a lot of sports. That's been sort of our reset time, is Sunday and Saturday afternoon college and Sunday afternoon NFL football. I could care less about either team that's in the Super Bowl this year. Literally, like I might skew one way for certain reasons, but I really don't care. I really have zero skin in the football game, but I could not be more excited about the halftime performance, so much so that my kids all alerted me when they found out. I think they found out before me, and I got all these text messages. I was like, guess who's performing at the Super Bowl? And then what I think is really funny is that the opening act is like my other favorite. So it's kind of great. I put on Instagram once, like anybody who's at the intersection of loving both the pregame performance and the halftime performance equally, you're my people. Because I feel like that sort of musical, weird Venn diagram, like those of us who fall in the middle of that are my people. And I love that. I love to know who you are. So those are the things that I am using as like a reset or like an energy refuel, if you think about it. Like, you got to, whatever metaphor you want to use, you got to keep your tank full. You got to keep your cup full. You got to pour back or whatever. You can't pour from an empty cup. So you got to refill. I am looking at the wonder in life as a way to do those things, how to refill, how to recharge, how to make sure you keep your energy up by adding back into your life, not just giving out. And it's a purposeful act. You don't just, maybe there are some people out there who just wake up in the morning and they just feel wonder. Like, God bless them. I wish I was them. I have never been that person. It has always been an effort to find the light and find the wonder and peek through the weeds to get to what is good. I have this card deck, Instructions for Living, which is all different either quotes or full poems from Mary Oliver. And I wrote it down because I want to make sure I get it right. The one I picked the other day, it was long, but the very first thing it started with was, every day I walk out into the world to be dazzled. And I thought, yeah, that's it. That's the thing. Like, no one is just, well, maybe some people are. I am not somebody who is naturally noticing the good. And I don't think anybody is. I think we are wired as a self-protection mechanism left over from our caveman days to be looking for danger and looking for trouble. And therefore, it requires some effort to look for the good stuff and the light and the joy and the wonder. And so every day I walk out into the world, to be dazzled. Like, I purposefully want to be dazzled. So what's going to dazzle me today? And I specifically love the choice of the word dazzled too, because it's not just like, oh, that's nice, or that's good, whatever those sort of blah words that are supposed to be positive, but also feel a little like milquetoast. It's dazzled. I want to be dazzled. But my challenge to me and my challenge to you is to, like, dazzling things don't have to be big, sparkly, eye-catching things. What are you looking for to be dazzled? The other day, a week ago, my husband had to be, are you catching a theme here? My husband has to go to these nice places for work and I tag along. My husband had to be in Arizona for work and I actually got sick. I was supposed to go the whole time. I got really sick. Also, it was in the middle of all of the Twin City stuff and I just didn't feel right leaving at the time. But I did manage to sneak out for a couple of days, right when the sort of polar vortex hit. I was able to get out for a few days. And, it wasn't really hot. And yet two things happened. One, we encountered on our walk back to our hotel room one evening like wild boars, warthogs. I don't know. I don't know what they're called. I'm not from a desert, so I'm not sure, but I think they're like pigs. I would call them pigs, but with big, things. And that was, if you're not watching and you just heard me go big wool, I was imitating like tusks or like, well, I don't know what they're called on warthogs, but horns. So big ones. And then babies, like it was a mom, I'm guessing, and her babies. And then I don't know if a dad or another large adult one. My husband was like, don't go near them. They're so dangerous. But, I'm such an animal freak. I almost was like, piggies. Luckily, he snatched me just in time to keep me away from them. But I thought, who gets to see warthogs? Like, I guess people who live in Arizona probably do a lot. But to me, that was pretty dazzling, right? Like you get to see something in nature that you don't. I used to read my kids this book called The Three Javelinas when they were growing up. And it was like a play on The Three Little Pigs, obviously, but Latina. But it was just, I've never seen them in real life. So it was kind of cool and dazzling. But then the other thing that happened was, it wasn't super warm. It was beautiful. It's like -12 here. So it was warm compared to there. But, we were still in jeans and sweaters and we had to wear jackets at night. It was a little chilly. But one day our flight got canceled or delayed and then delayed. And so we just decided rather than like go to the airport and sit and wait and take a chance, we rebooked ourselves on an early morning flight. But that meant we needed to get another hotel room. And we used points and we picked somewhere near the airport. And it happened to be this beautiful, like carved into the side of a mountain resort. And so he had work to do and I went and sat by the pool and it was chilly, but I didn't care. I put a bathing suit on and some sunscreen. The sun was out and I sat in this like incredible mountain oasis and thought, who gets to do this? Like on a points hotel at the last minute because our flight got delayed. That's what I mean by like a purposeful choice to look for wonder. I could have dwelled on the fact that it was cold and I was going there for some relief and it was still chilly. I could have dwelled on the fact that we were going to be a day later than we thought and we had to change a bunch of plans and we had to scoot things around. I could have dwelled on the fact that, there was no reason for the flight to be like, there was no reason for it. My flight on the way out was a nightmare and we got on the plane, off the plane, on the plane, off the plane. And it was I could have dwelled there too. I could have dwelled on a lot of things that actually went wrong, but instead I chose to close my eyes for a few minutes in my bathing suit, soak in the sun as much as I possibly could, and then throw a couple towels over myself when it got cold so that I could stay outside for as long as possible because I knew my return was going to be to Arctic temperatures. That was a purposeful choice. I decided I am going to look for opportunities to be dazzled instead of focus on all the things that went wrong with this trip. I will be honest, in the beginning, it was tricky for me because I didn't feel like I should go. It felt like, things aren't great here. Far be it for me to go and escape, first of all, and second, go live in like bliss for 3 days at, this desert hotel, this desert's like, it was really like a resort where we were staying and be warm and see friends and do fun things and like, not be sort of weighted down by what was going on. That's why I didn't go the whole week. I also got sick, but the sickness was well timed because I really didn't feel comfortable going the whole week. But I did force myself to go on Friday and I did spend the weekend and I decided, okay, this is refilling your cup. This is a thing. It was already on the books. It's already planned. You didn't know the timing of this thing was going to be you getting out of town just when, stuff was hitting the fan. So take it as 3 days to refuel and recharge so that you can come back because the fight is still going to be there when you get back. And take that time while you're away to really step out into the world and be dazzled. And that's what I did. I soaked it all up. I soaked it in. I spent the evening the extra evening that we were there, we went to the bar to get some food because there was no place to sit because everybody's flights were canceled. So it was a pretty full hotel. And we sat next to a woman whose flight was also canceled for a big business trip. And she found out where we were from and she started asking us a million questions. And we had a really great conversation. Another white woman. So she was like, can I be candid? And she was asking us all these questions. Our bartenders were all people of color and they sort of got involved a little bit and were like, asking us where we're from and asking us, what our experience there was and telling us they had family in Minnesota. And it was just a really a really good conversation. And I felt good about, at least if I'm here, at least I can tell the truth to these people who aren't from here and who maybe need to know what's going on. So it felt like, even though I got to get away for a few days, I still was kind of doing my part to, like, you know, support the cause, if you will. Anyway, it was all a way of looking at the situation in a way that would fortify me rather than drain me further. Oh. For those of you listening and not watching, you just missed the best stretch of the puppy dog next to me. But, you know, another way to be dazzled, I guess. I just think we have to remember two things. One, yes, it's very easy right now to get overwhelmed by everything that's going on, because it does sometimes feel like you got to keep your head on a swivel to keep up with everything. And so remembering that that's by design. We are meant to be confused, and we are meant to be thrown off, and we are meant to be less powerful than we really are, because that's the only way they get to do what they get to do. So if we can remember to choose two things. One, where our energy goes, where our attention goes, what is important to us in the moment and for the duration, enough for us to give our time and energy to it. And then understand that other people are going to take care of the other stuff. And two, how can we look at things in order to be dazzled so that we can continue to refill our cups and refuel to take this on for the long haul? Whether it's global or local or personal, the weeds aren't going anywhere. So how do we manage them and find wonder enough to refill ourselves to keep doing the managing of the weeds? So that's where I am. Hopefully I'll be back next week with some more ways of finding the wonder and managing the weeds, because I don't see them going anywhere for a while. But if we're all in this together, that certainly helps. Thanks. Keep looking for the wonder. I'll see you next week.